Welcome you all for today's didactic. Today's topic is psychological support for women who have faced sexual assault. We'll first discuss what are the learning objectives for this didactic. The first learning objective is understanding the trauma reaction. So, after a woman has experienced sexual assault or rape, what are the various trauma reactions that takes place? So, number one is immediate psychological reaction that we'll be discussing, secondary trauma or victimization, long term psychological issues or long term reaction, and factors that increase or decrease the trauma. Second learning objective would be the process of providing psychological support. Now, how we will educate the woman about the possible reactions to trauma, help the woman with the emotional regulation, help in managing the numbing sensation, managing reaction to triggers, handling flashbacks, grounding techniques, and so on. Third learning objective is referral to a mental health professional. So here we'll discuss about the referral pathways where we'll be talking about when to refer a woman who have experienced sexual assault, to whom do we refer, how do we refer, and how will the treatment process or the referral help. So in the beginning, let's understand what sexual violence is. So sexual violence is any sexual act, attempt to obtain a sexual act, unwanted sexual comments or advances. It can be by any person, regardless of their relationship to the victim, and it can take place in any setting, including home and work. So basically, in private or public places. Therefore, any act that is a sexual act or a comment or an advance, which is definitely unwanted and not consented for by any person, irrespective of what is the relationship of the perpetrator with the woman, and in any setting, will qualify as sexual violence. Now, let's discuss what are the various types of sexual violence. Number one, it can be a coercive penetration of vagina, anus, or mouth. It can be attempted penetration. It can be drug facilitated sexual violence. It can be threats of sexual violence. It can be unwanted sexual advances, sexual harassment, incest, or child sexual abuse. Now, there are certain statements which are commonly we come across as public opinion or notion about rape or sexual assault, which relates to the woman's profession, the dressing style, activities, character, etc. Now, we'll discuss few of these statements and we'll understand whether these statements are true or false. So, what do you think? A woman wearing short dresses or sleeveless dress or without a dupatta, does that provoke men to behave badly? Does that justify the act of a sexual assault? Why did she not scream or shout for help when she was being assaulted? Or she was raped because she went out alone at night, because that was her fault. So, what do you think about these statements? Is it true or false? Another set of statements are once a woman gives consent for kissing or touching her breast, maybe, then she cannot object if the man does more. That is, if the man does a penetrative sex, a forced penetrative sex. So the woman who has given consent for some part of the sexual act is later not consenting to the rest of it, can't really complain about being assaulted because she has given consent partly. Second is maybe married women can never say that their husband raped them because they're married and it's the husband who has done the act. Or sex workers cannot complain of being raped because it's their job. So, what do you again think about these? Now, let's understand psychological responses to trauma. So, the various psychological responses that can happen to trauma resulting from a sexual assault. This we'll try to understand from the case vignette of Mrs. S. So, first, we'll understand the immediate response, that is, right after the sexual assault or rape has taken place, what is the immediate response? So, here we'll discuss the case of Miss S. She's a 27-year-old woman. She works in a bank. She had come early in the morning to work and co-worker had tried to kiss her and touch her when they were alone against her consent. Now, she was shocked and felt dirty. In the bank, when others came at 9 a.m., she didn't greet anyone or smile, which she would do usually. She didn't feel like speaking to anyone. She quietly walked to her desk and kept staring at her desktop. She couldn't even work. She couldn't even work. She told a female colleague about what happened, who made a statement like, "But you looked so calm this morning. It doesn't look like you would have gone through such a terrible and scary experience." So here we can see that the female colleague with whom she shared that incident didn't find anything visible, any sign of trauma or distress visible externally. However, from the case witness, we can see that this lady, she did experience a lot of distress. She was shocked. She was feeling very dirty. She was not able to talk to anybody. She was not able to work. But yet, it was not evident to other people externally. So, a lot of times, this can happen that right after a trauma, the immediate response can be in such a form where it may not be visible to other people because the person is feeling so numbed or is so scared or is so shocked. But irrespective of the fact of that, the woman does feel a lot of reaction or responses, and need not be that everybody reacts or feels the same thing. Now, moving to the second type of trauma reaction, that is secondary victimization response. Now, here we'll continue with Mrs. S. Story. So, Miss S, with a lot of difficulty after this incident, finally managed to discuss with her colleague and her elder sister about the incident in details. They suggested that they should complain to the office authority and to the police. Next day, while reporting to the HR and manager and then to the police, Miss S burst out crying. She was shaking and was very anxious. So she was asked questions like, what happened? At what time did the incident happen? Where in the office exactly did it happen? So a lot of questions were being asked to her about that incident. The more questions were asked, the more she felt uncomfortable, and gradually she started becoming quiet. She started breathing heavily and eventually was feeling very dizzy. After some time, she fainted. This happened every time she spoke to the office lawyer or when she was taken for a medical examination. So this kind of gives us a picture of how secondary victimization takes place. So that incident has happened and she has experienced immediate response to that incident. But after that, when she is gone to the office for reporting the case or to the police, or when she's taken for the medical examination, she is being asked repeatedly about the incident, the details of the incident, which kind of takes her back repeatedly to the time or the incident itself, which makes her experience the trauma all over again. So that is the secondary victimization process. Lastly, the third response that we'll come to is the PTSD response. That is a long-term response otherwise for the trauma. So Miss S, now she's 31 years old. She's married and she's a housewife. She has difficulty feeling happy or excited, however. She tries hard to forget the incident that happened 4 years ago, but fails as the memories keep flashing in front of her. So it's already been 4 years to the incident. Whenever she sees a man in a blue shirt or a man standing close to her or a man trying to talk to her closely, she freezes and starts sweating. She gets so frightened that she keeps her doors and windows locked. At night, she wakes up trembling, scares. She's so scared she dreams of her being attacked. She avoids watching crime scenes or fights on TV. Many times, when her husband tries to be intimate with her, she freezes and feels like a stone with no feelings. So, here we can see that after the immediate response or the secondary victimization, it has been 4 years to that incident, but yet she has not been able to come out of the trauma of that incident. Every time she sees a man wearing a blue shirt, probably the colleague who assaulted her was wearing a blue shirt, or whenever there's a man who comes very close to her trying to talk to her, or anybody stranger or otherwise, she feels very frightened, as a result of which she doesn't feel happy. She is not being able to be intimate with her husband. She can't enjoy movies. She is always scared. She keeps her doors and windows locked, so she's not basically living a very functional, happy life. So, this can be a long term response of a trauma that a woman has experienced because of a sexual assault or rape. So, now we'll discuss some of the specific symptoms that we see in women who go through the trauma of a sexual assault. So, one of these common response is dissociation. Now, dissociation is basically a state of disconnection or maybe a lack of continuity between the thoughts, the memories, surroundings, or the action, past action, identity, etc. So, an individual who's experiencing dissociation, she may feel that things around her are unreal. So, basically, she cuts the connection between herself and the emotions or the incidents that's happening or has happened with her in real. So, this can occur as a coping mechanism, like a natural coping mechanism, where an individual tries to put some distance between themselves and the traumatic situation. So, some of the dissociative symptoms, like these are the ways that dissociation can be manifested. Experiencing flashbacks of traumatic events, flashback we'll discuss. Inability to remember things for some time, losing memories about certain people or some certain places or events or etc. A blurred or distorted sense of reality, a feeling of numbness and disconnection towards one's environment, a distorted sense of place and time, a feeling of detachment from one's emotions. Now, we'll also talk about what is flashback. So, flashback is basically a distressing memory of the trauma that has taken place. It is definitely unwanted and intrusive in nature. That is, we don't want to think about that. We don't want the memory of that. Or it is not at this point of time that I was thinking about it. Probably I'm doing something else. And in the middle of it, the memory intrudes. It kind of relieves the trauma as if it were happening now. So, a woman who has experienced some sexual assault or rape or anything of that nature and is experiencing a trauma of that, when the woman gets a flashback of that incident, so it seems to that woman that the assault or that incident is taking place right now. So it relieves the trauma and it kind of takes over all the senses, making the person extremely numb. So we'll try to summarize what are the psychological reactions that takes place as a traumatic reaction as a result of sexual assault. So that are in the form of immediate reactions and some are the later reactions. So the immediate reactions are blaming oneself, feeling of numbness, being confused, extremely frightened and scared of the situations around, feeling extremely angry because of the situation, ashamed of what has happened, or in a daze or a very confused state. The later psychological reactions can be memories of the incidents flashing up constantly, living in a constant fear, which we saw in the case of Miss S, isolating oneself, so not connecting with the friends, family, colleagues, and even anymore. Sudden palpitations, sweating, or other autonomic arousal or anxiety reactions, loss of trust from around a lot of people, inability to concentrate on work or studies. So basically, the person's daily functioning gets affected. Now that we have discussed the reactions, we'll also talk about some of the factors that may influence the severity of the psychological distress. Now, one factor that can influence is nature of assault. So whether during the sexual assault, there was also presence of physical violence, was there threat to life? To what extent was the woman threatened or harmed? Whether the woman was drugged during or before the sexual assault, or whether the woman was raped by one person or was it a gang rape? Second factor that plays a role in influencing the severity of psychological distress are responses of family and friends. So these responses can be supportive responses, wherein the school, if the woman is in a school, like she's a girl, she's going into the school or in a college or the workplace, they give time off to the person for her to get better or heal from the trauma for some time. So maybe if the woman is working, so if the office gives her some time off where she is not have to fulfill all her daily office work, also getting some time off from home, like family is being supported. Counseling, whether the person is has certain counseling services available to herself, and if the family or friends and other people are supporting the person and connecting her to the counselors. Not being blamed and being discriminated, that can play a huge role, where if the families or the friends are blaming the woman, or she is being discriminated because of the act that has happened to her, that kind of influences in a negative way the amount of psychological distress the woman is facing. There can be some perpetrator issues also that can play a role. That is, if the perpetrator is out on bail, or if the perpetrator is someone from the family, or is a colleague, or is a neighbor, so the woman is coming into contact with that person. She sees the person. Every time she sees the person, maybe she can have feel triggered and have flashbacks, or have memory of the incident that has happened. Media trial, something very relevant in today's time, where media tries to become the judge, and that can actually cause a huge impact in the level of psychological distress. Sensitivity within the system. So, how sensitively is the health system, police system, legal system, etc., working and handling the case? Is the woman being asked repeated questions about the incident? Uh, is the woman being made facing a lot of is the woman facing a lot of judgmental statements? So all of that needs to be considered, and that is very important. Lastly, if the woman has had a past trauma of any nature, past history of psychological problem, if she belongs or she comes from an abusive family, so we know that the woman is not receiving probably any supportive response. If she doesn't have a proper home to stay, so her safety and security can't be ensured, that constantly increases the severity of the psychological distress she's experiencing. If she has any kind of physical or sensory disability, or has intellectual disability. So, again, we'll try to summarize some of the protective and the vulnerable factors that influence the severity or extent of psychological distress experienced by the woman. So, protective factors include support from family and relatives, from school, college, or whatever the workplace is, help with work or studies, trauma counseling, very important here. Vulnerable factors includes re-traumatizing experiences, that is the secondary victimization reaction, past history of abuse or psychological problem, media and the systems, that is the legal or the medical systems, faulty way of handling the case, and lastly, lack of adequate support from the closed ones. Now we'll come to the second learning objectives, that is, how do we offer the support and the service to the woman who has experienced sexual assault. So we'll talk about the counseling services. So if a woman comes for help or counseling right after the trauma has she has experienced trauma, or right after the assault has taken place, then we definitely need to deliver psychological first aid, and we can do that by following the lives model, where L stands for listening, I stands for inquiring about her physical and emotional needs, V stands for validating her response, trusting her experience, E stands for ensuring her safety and confidentiality and making her feel safe, secure, and at control. Lastly, S stands for supporting her and connecting her through various support systems. Next, we'll talk about how do we reduce secondary trauma. So, what is the counseling methods that we can use? We need to assure the survivor that the assault was not her fault. We have to give her a sense of control and agency. That is, if she wants to file a case, she can. Whom she wants to inform, she can choose. And she can have the freedom to step out of all these procedures anytime she wants to. We need to assure her that her consent will be taken before introducing any therapeutic technique, or before any particular step that is taken with her. And all of this has to be done at a very mutually agreed pace. We need to take her permission before sharing or discussing all these details with her family members. If there's a need to discuss with a family member, for example, if the woman has self-harm tendencies, and it's important to inform the family members. So before informing the family members, we definitely need to take the consent of the woman. Now, if the woman is experiencing a lot of mood swings, or she probably will be experiencing a lot of difficult emotions like maybe anger, guilt, shame, etc. So, how are certain ways that we can manage that? So, we'll talk about only few techniques. There can be various other techniques, but here we'll briefly talk about few. Number one can be the deep breathing technique, which is very helpful in calming a person. The instructions can go this way, where you say, close your eyes, inhale through your nose with a long, deep breath, very slowly, filling your stomach with air. Exhale very slowly through the mouth till the air is fully released. While exhaling, tell yourself to relax in your mind. Repeat this process till you feel calmer and relaxed. So, we can suggest the woman to practice deep breathing with this instruction. When the woman is experiencing a lot of flashbacks or has a lot of triggers around, or because of certain cues in the environment is getting repetitively triggered, so we need to handle that as well. But before we handle that, we need to identify these triggers, whether these triggers are internal or external. So we could ask few of these questions, like what was happening around you when you felt triggered, or when you experienced the flashback, what was happening around you? Where were you at that time? What were you doing at that point of time? Was there any particular thing, like was there a smell that you got, or a sound that you heard, or some sight, something that kind of triggered you? So that way we'll be able to identify what are the triggers for her to experience flashbacks. Now, for reducing flashbacks, one very important technique is grounding technique. So, grounding technique is some set of simple strategies that can help us detach from the emotional pain. So, it tries to detach or distract us from the traumatic experience to the present, where we are safe and comfortable and will not be experiencing the difficult emotions. For example, if a woman is experiencing flashback, we can do grounding technique where we can say, like, take a deep breath. Once you feel calm, like you can follow, make the person do deep breathing. And once the woman is calm, we can say that, like, imagine that you are sitting in a very peaceful place where maybe there are a lot of mountains around you. The mountains are covered with clouds, and you're sitting there. And when she's feeling very calm and peaceful, then tell yourself that I'm safe now. Whatever happened, happened in the past. And right now, I'm just experiencing the flashback of it. I am in the present. I am safe now. There's nothing threatening or harmful happening to me right now. Another very effective grounding technique is using the five senses. So we can suggest the woman to see five things that's around her, four things that she can touch around her. She can focus on three things that she can hear, two things that she can smell right now, and one thing that she can taste right now. So, utilizing all the five sense organs, if the woman is hearing, listening, looking, smelling, tasting things that are around her, that kinds of grounds the woman to the present situation and makes her feel calm, that nothing traumatic is happening with me right now. That happened in the past. Right now, I am in the present and I am calm and safe. Yet another very effective technique of grounding or helping to deal with trauma or flashback is preparing a comfort bag. So, for preparing a comfort bag, first we'll need to take a bag where we'll put in things where these things will be something that we really connect to. These things can be connected to our various sense organs, like each one of them or few of them. These things has to be something where the woman has a personal connection and pleasant memories with these things that makes her feel comfortable. We'll put those things in the bag, and she will be opening that bag and holding that bag and the things in the bag at the time of a distress. Now, the contents of the grounding bag needs to be personally significant, as I said, and it has to have a pleasant memory with the thing. It can be connected to each of the five senses or few of the five senses, which kind of makes the woman familiar and regain focus on the present environment. So some of the examples can be a teddy bear, can be coffee beans for the strong aroma, feather for the texture, touch it, or some flowers, etc. Or maybe a old toy or a pillow, some things that makes the woman feel very comfortable and calm. Now we'll move to the third objective for this didactic, that is referral pathways to the mental health service. So first we'll talk about when do we refer a woman who has experienced sexual assault. So if there is a risk of self-harm, that is one of the major reasons why we need to refer. Second is if the depression is so severe that it is interfering with the woman's day-to-day activities. Some PTSD symptoms are present where the woman is experiencing severe flashbacks, nightmares, where the sleep is severely disturbed, anxiety triggered all the time, etc. Next is psychological distress is persisting even after few sessions of counseling has taken place. If there is a presence of psychosis or severe mental illness in the woman, then we definitely need to refer her. If the survivor of the sexual assault or rape has become pregnant due to the act or has gone through a medically dominated pregnancy. Also, if the person has an intellectual disability, then also we need to refer her. Whom do we refer to? We can refer to a psychiatrist, to a clinical psychologist, to a psychiatric social worker, counselors, or to the district mental health program that we have at various districts, to the primary care doctor, etc. Now, how do we refer? Now, when we are referring the woman, we first and foremost need to set up an appointment and brief the person whom we are referring to about the case. Otherwise, what happens is, again, if the woman goes there and she has to start narrating about the incident, experience, and everything, she will feel traumatized again, or she'll be experiencing secondary victimization. So it would be really good if we can make a referral letter where we give the basic details of the woman, brief about what the incident is, what the case is about, what experiences she's feeling or what she's having, and what is the purpose of referral. It would be also very good if we can follow up after the referral and we can give a feedback to the survivor. It is extremely important that we do careful documentation of the entire procedure where we will make note of the details of the person, the woman we are addressing. We will note down the reason for referral, what the feedback or the follow-up notes are, and also what is the final feedback. So everything has to be documented very carefully, yet the confidentiality of it has to be maintained. Now, we also need to know why are we referring, like how will the treatment or the referral help? It will definitely manage the symptoms. So the experience of the depression or PTSD, those severe symptoms that the person is experiencing, it will be, the person will be relieved from the symptoms. So the symptoms will be managed. It will improve the general mental health status of the woman. Her day-to-day functioning can be improved. Her relationship, so we discussed in the long-term effects. So it can lead to a trauma resulting from a sexual assault can lead to extreme social isolation. So that will help here, where the relationship among maybe with the husband or with the friends or family members can be improved. And it will help in reducing the secondary trauma that she has experienced or the anxiety related to the evidence and the procedures that she has to go through. It will reduce all of that. Now, lastly, we have to talk about that there are some people who have some special needs, or they're from the marginalized or a special group. They belong to a special group or a marginalized group. And if someone from those special groups or marginalized groups have experienced sexual assault or has experienced rape and has come for our services, then we need to create a very inclusive environment, inclusive service, so that we can tailor to the needs of these people. So some of the examples of these special group are sex workers. There can be someone from a transgender community, a woman experiencing sexual assault belonging to the LGBTQI plus community. The woman can be with a person with disability, like a sensory disability, maybe deaf and dumb, or certain physical disability, maybe locomotor disability or intellectual disability. So we need to prepare a very inclusive service for all these people, or anyone who's experiencing a lot of discrimination, maybe due to caste, class, religion, etc. Now, these are some of the guiding principles that can help us prepare or create an inclusive environment and service. We must not make assumptions and look at our own biases carefully. We have to reflect on our biases and will not make any assumptions about the woman. We must show cultural sensitivity. So we will enable the survivor to feel at ease. If we understand the cultural background of that woman or the person, we'll be able to make the person feel at ease, and the rapport establishment will be better. We have to acknowledge the challenges that she faces because of the group, the special group that she belongs to, maybe, and provide a very enabling environment for the woman. We must also not show any kind of disbelief, ridicule, or any kind of judgmental behavior, both explicitly, maybe like verbally saying it out, or implicitly, like something that gets expressed through our facial expression or our body language. We must be very careful that we don't make assumptions or express our own personal judgments. And throughout the process, the confidentiality of their identity, their profession, their orientation, all of this needs to be maintained very carefully.